It began like any other morning, gray light spilling through the half-closed curtains, the hum of a world that didn't seem to notice how quietly your heart had been aching. You were scrolling through your feed, half awake, half lost, letting the endless stream of headlines blur into one another. And then, there it was. Elon Musk said, "Find this person immediately." The words leapt off the screen like they were written for you alone. You blinked once, twice, unsure if your mind was playing tricks. A flood of comments scrolled beneath the post, speculation, disbelief, laughter, but none of that mattered. Something inside you stilled, a pulse of recognition you couldn't explain. For a moment, it felt as though time had folded in on itself, connecting you to something vast, unseen, electric. You'd always admired Musk from afar, not for the cars or rockets, but for that relentless refusal to stop, to give in, to believe that limits were real. But this felt different. This wasn't about admiration. It was as though a door had cracked open, and a voice was whispering your name from the other side. You set your phone down, palms damp, heart racing. You laughed nervously at yourself. Find this person immediately. How could that mean me? The world was full of billions of people, all chasing their own version of purpose, all waiting for someone to notice. And yet, deep down, there was that quiet ache that maybe, just maybe, you'd been seen. That feeling didn't fade. All day, you carried it with you. At work, as you typed, as you smiled through conversations you didn't feel, as you watched the clock tick through hours that seemed to blur into each other. You felt it, the sense that something invisible had shifted. That maybe your ordinary life wasn't so ordinary anymore. When you got home that night, you replayed the clip again. The camera had caught Musk in one of his rare unscripted moments, eyes distant, almost reflective. Find this person immediately, he'd said to someone off-screen. You'll know when you see them. The internet had theories. Some thought it was a publicity stunt. Others said it was code for a secret project. But you couldn't shake the sense that there was something deeper, something not meant for the masses, but for one soul ready to hear it. Maybe it was because lately, you'd been questioning everything, your work, your dreams, the quiet feeling that you were meant for something more but didn't know where to begin. You'd been surviving, not living. You'd forgotten the taste of purpose. And now, these words, spoken by a man whose life seemed galaxies away from yours, had pierced through the fog. That night, you couldn't sleep. You stared at the ceiling, replaying moments from years ago, those times you'd tried, failed, given up. The projects left unfinished, the people who didn't understand, the promises you made to yourself and broke quietly. You'd grown used to being the person in the background, convincing yourself it was fine. But now the quiet part of you that once dreamed was stirring again. You sat up, turned on the light, and opened your notebook, the one buried at the bottom of the drawer, filled with sketches, notes, and impossible ideas. You hadn't touched it in years. The first page was still dated from another lifetime, back when you believed you could change the world. The handwriting was clumsy, the ink faded, but the dream was still alive on those pages, waiting. You whispered to yourself, maybe this is the sign. There was something strange about believing again. It made your chest hurt and your hands tremble. It reminded you how much you'd missed that fire. The next few days blurred into a mix of routine and obsession. You watched interviews, read articles, searched for clues, as though decoding a message from the universe. But the truth was simpler than you expected. It wasn't about finding him, it was about finding you. And that realization changed everything. Because the more you thought about it, the more you realized, you'd been waiting your whole life for someone to notice your potential, to open a door, to give permission to start. But maybe that moment, those 5 words, were never meant as a search for a stranger. Maybe they were a mirror. Find this person immediately. The person with the dreams buried under fear. The person who almost gave up. The person who's been quietly surviving when they were born to lead, create, and ignite. The person was you. Something shifted inside you that day. You started small, waking earlier, writing again, planning without mocking your own ambition. You found yourself staring out of bus windows, imagining different lives, not with envy but with curiosity. You began to notice signs everywhere, a number on a billboard, a phrase on a stranger's t-shirt, a lyric that played at just the right time. They all whispered the same message, wake up. It's time, And somewhere deep inside, you did. Weeks passed, and people noticed the change before you did. You smiled more, spoke differently, carried yourself with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. You weren't chasing validation anymore, you were chasing purpose. Then, one night, an email arrived in your inbox. It was from a small tech conference you'd once applied to volunteer at years ago but never attended. They'd found your old application, your essay about building for the future, and offered you a last-minute slot to attend a special session, guest speaker, Elon Musk. For a moment, you froze. Coincidence? Maybe. But something told you otherwise. You stared at the message, heart pounding. You'd almost deleted that old email account months ago. You'd almost missed this. But destiny doesn't care about almosts, it waits for the ones who finally decide to show up. You booked the ticket. The days leading up to the event felt surreal. Every moment seemed charged with invisible energy, as though the universe had been waiting for this alignment. You rehearsed what you might say if you ever got close enough to speak to him, but deep down, you knew this wasn't about meeting a billionaire. It was about meeting the part of yourself that believed anything was possible again. When the day finally came, you stood outside the conference hall, surrounded by strangers who seemed so sure of themselves. For a moment, doubt crept in again. What am I even doing here? But then you remembered those 5 words that started it all. You took a breath and stepped inside. The room buzzed with conversation, the kind of energy that hums before something big happens. Lights dimmed, and the screen lit up. Musk walked onto the stage, unassuming, confident, human. He began to speak about the future, about humanity, about the power of individual action. And as you listened, you realized something profound. Every great revolution began with one person who refused to stay small. You looked around at the crowd, hundreds of faces illuminated by blue light, and you realized, you weren't here to watch. You were here to remember who you are. And in that instant, you understood why those words had found you. Because, find this person immediately, wasn't a command to the world, it was a call to your. The applause echoed through the hall as Musk's talk ended. The sound was thunderous, yet you barely heard it. You were still caught in that strange stillness that had filled you halfway through his words. He'd said something simple, almost throwaway, but it struck like lightning. The world changes when someone stops waiting for permission. You'd heard variations of that line before, but this time it was different. You felt as if the words had bypassed your mind and gone straight into your chest. Every decision you'd postponed, every dream you'd filed away for, someday, began to stir like it was waking from a long sleep. When the lights came up, you stayed seated, unwilling to break the moment. Around you, people were gathering their things, buzzing with excitement. Some were talking about networking, others about investments or technology. But you weren't thinking about money or fame. You were thinking about the life that could begin if you stopped hiding from yourself. You didn't meet Musk that day. You didn't need to. The real meeting had already happened, the one between you and your own destiny. But fate wasn't done. As you were leaving the hall, your phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You were in that room for a reason. Don't ignore it. You froze, staring at the screen. No name. No context. Just that one line. For a moment, your rational mind kicked in. It's probably spam, you thought. But another part of you, the part that had felt the weight of those words, the part that believed in signs, whispered, "What if it's not?" You replied before you could second-guess yourself. "Who is this?" No response came. Minutes passed. You walked out into the city night, the air thick with noise and light, but you felt detached from it all. The crowd, the cars, the chatter, it all blurred into the background. Because something deeper had begun to move. That night, lying in bed, you couldn't shake that message. You were in that room for a reason. You replayed the day over and over, the moment you'd seen the post, the decision to attend, the feeling that had followed you like a pulse. Maybe destiny didn't come in flashes of lightning, but in quiet threads connecting one moment to the next until the picture finally made sense. The next morning, you woke early. You didn't reach for your phone or scroll mindlessly. You made coffee and sat with your notebook open, staring at a blank page until the pen began to move. Words poured out, not plans, not goals, but something deeper. A vision. A sense of what your life could become if you stopped running from it. You wrote until your hand hurt. When you finished, you realized you'd outlined something that felt like a blueprint, not just for a career, but for a calling. A project, a purpose, something that could impact lives beyond your own. You didn't know how, or when, or even why, but you knew it mattered. Later that day, you got another text. Keep going. The right people will find you. Still no name. Still no clue. But this time, you didn't question it. Something inside you whispered that this was how destiny worked, not with clear instructions, but with breadcrumbs. And if you followed them, they'd lead somewhere impossible. Days turned into weeks. You worked quietly, obsessively, refining your idea. You stayed up late, researching, sketching, learning. You found yourself awake at 2 a.m. with a strange joy, the kind that comes when you realize you're finally aligned with your purpose. People around you noticed the difference. Friends asked what had changed. You just smiled and said, "I stopped waiting." Then, one evening, as you were reviewing your notes, an email arrived. Subject asterisk, "You're invited." It was from a company you'd never heard of, something called Atlas Initiative. The message was brief: "We've been following your work. We believe your idea aligns with a project we're building. Confidential meeting, Friday, 9 p.m. Location will be shared 30 minutes prior. NDA attached." You stared at it, heart pounding. You hadn't shared your notes publicly. You hadn't even told anyone. How could they know? It felt impossible, but by now, you'd learned not to dismiss the impossible. You signed the NDA and replied yes. Friday came. As the sun dipped below the skyline, you sat waiting for the follow-up. At 8:30, your phone buzzed again, location pinned. Come alone. The address led you to a quiet part of the city, an industrial area that seemed half abandoned. You hesitated at first, but curiosity and that strange sense of inevitability pushed you forward. Inside, you found a small group of people seated around a long table. They looked ordinary, tired, focused, human, but there was something in their eyes, a shared fire. They smiled as you entered, as if they'd been expecting you. One of them, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, gestured for you to sit. "Welcome," she said. "We've been looking for you." You swallowed hard. "For me? Why?" She smiled faintly. "Because you're one of the ones who still believes. The ones who don't need titles to make a difference." You saw the signal, didn't you? You blinked. "You mean, Musk's message?" She nodded. "That was never a stunt. It was a catalyst. A call to a few who would feel it, not see it as marketing, but as a message." You didn't know whether to laugh or be terrified. "So this is real?" "As real as purpose," she said softly. "We're building something bigger than any one of us. And people like you, you're the ones who can feel the future before it arrives." For a moment, the air felt heavy with meaning. You wanted to ask 100 questions, but she continued before you could. "This isn't about technology or profit," she said. "It's about awakening. We live in a world asleep, distracted, divided, afraid. But sometimes, something pierces through the noise and calls the right souls awake. That message reached you for a reason." You felt a shiver crawl up your spine. She slid a small card across the table. On it was a single phrase: "Build what only you can see." No company name. No logo. Just those words. You left that meeting shaken, exhilarated, and more alive than you'd ever felt. That night, you didn't sleep. You went straight to work, your hands trembling with urgency. You started piecing together your idea into something tangible, a prototype, a framework, a beginning. The hours vanished. You forgot to eat, forgot the world outside your screen. By dawn, something existed that hadn't the night before. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, you understood what it meant to be found. The next few months were a blur. The project grew faster than you imagined. You met others who'd followed the same invisible signal, people from different countries, different paths, all connected by a shared spark. They weren't geniuses or prodigies, they were believers. Dreamers who'd stopped doubting their place in the story. You built together, learned together, failed and tried again. And slowly, something beautiful began to form, an idea that could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond your reach. And then, one evening, as the team was reviewing progress, someone said quietly, "He's seen it." You looked up. Who? Elon. The room fell silent. The woman from that first meeting smiled faintly. "He knows what you're building." "How?" you asked, breathless. She shrugged. "He always knows when the right people answer the call." You didn't know what to say. A strange calm washed over you, not disbelief, not excitement, but a sense of completion. Like the loop had closed. Because you finally understood. It was never about him finding you, it was about you finding yourself. And now, you had.